For decades, no one paid attention to him. His neighbors saw him walking the same streets, going in and out of the same places, and living such an ordinary routine that it seemed impossible for there to be anything extraordinary about his life. He lived in a modest house, drove an old car, and wore the same worn-out clothes for years. Nothing about him seemed to suggest wealth. If you passed him on the street, you would probably do what everyone else had done his entire life. Assume he was just another elderly man beaten down by life. But there was one detail that nobody knew or could even imagine. While people were focused on that man's appearance, something completely different was happening behind the scenes of his life. Something was being built in silence, year after year. And when that discovery finally came to light, even the people who had known him were left in disbelief. Because that seemingly ordinary man had built something that nobody imagined was possible. And the most curious part is that he had none of the characteristics we normally associate with wealth. He wasn't a businessman, he wasn't an heir, and he hadn't won the lottery. If someone looked for an obvious explanation for his fortune, they simply wouldn't find one. And that's exactly where this story becomes interesting. Because if he didn't have any of the advantages we normally associate with financial success, then an inevitable question arises. How did a simple janitor manage to build something that people with much higher salaries never managed to achieve? And what you're about to discover has nothing to do with luck or genius, nor does it involve any hidden secret known only to a small minority of people. But to understand that, we first need to know who this man was. This is the story of Ronald Read. Born in 1921 in the state of Vermont, United States, Ronald grew up in a modest family and was the first person in his family to graduate from high school. To attend school, he walked miles and miles every day. Later, he worked for many years as a janitor at a gas station. After that, he worked at a department store performing simple and discreet tasks. His life never attracted attention. His neighbors described him as polite, reserved, and quiet, nothing out of the ordinary. He was the kind of person you greeted in the morning and forgot about a few minutes later. But while everyone saw only an ordinary worker, Ronald was building something that no one could see. And most impressively, he began building it without having any extraordinary advantage. Those who knew him more closely noticed some curious habits. Ronald avoided waste, repaired things instead of replacing them, and clipped discount coupons from the newspaper. When his coat tore, he put a safety pin on it and moved on. His car was old, his house was modest, and his lifestyle remained practically the same year after year. But Ronald's most intriguing habit was reading the Wall Street Journal. He didn't tread it forced at a sword to appear smart. He read it because he genuinely cared about what was written there, and it was precisely that habit that began to change the course of his financial life. Millions of people save money, but very few accumulate wealth the way Ronald did throughout his lifetime. You might think Ronald found a unique opportunity, a stock that multiplied hundreds of times, or that he simply got lucky, but it was none of those things. Most people believe that wealth comes from major events. A significant raise, a promotion, a business that explodes with growth, or a rare opportunity. But Ronald built his wealth in a way that was far less exciting, yet far more intelligent. And perhaps that's exactly why almost nobody noticed what was happening. While many people were searching for the perfect investment, Ronald was doing something much simpler. Something so simple that it is usually ignored. He invested consistently, without trying to predict the market, without looking for shortcuts, and without chasing quick wealth. And he kept doing it for decades. And what seemed small in 1 year began to gain momentum over time. Ronald Read's secret wasn't really a secret. It was simply a combination of three elements that almost everyone knows, but very few people apply for long enough: consistency, patience, and time. He invested regularly, not only when everything seemed favorable, and not only when he had money left over. And unlike what many people do when they start investing, Ronald didn't panic every time the market declined, nor did he sell his assets whenever negative speculation appeared. And above all, he allowed time to work in his favor, because compound interest starts working from the very first day of investing. But its true power appears when it receives something that almost nobody is willing to give it: decades. While most people search for quick results, Ronald allowed his investments to grow slowly. And that slow growth ended up producing a truly extraordinary result. It was only after his death that the true scale of it all came to light. When the attorneys completed the estate settlement, the entire town was left in shock. Ronald had accumulated approximately $8 million. An amount that nobody would have imagined when looking at that simple man with worn-out clothes and modest habits. The attorneys found holdings in more than 90 different companies. Shares of major American corporations accumulated over many years, were invested, split, and multiplied by time. Ronald left $2 million to a local public library, another $3 million went to a city hospital, and the remainder was divided among friends and family. A man who swept the floor of a gas station for decades became one of the largest donors in the history of that community. The story spread across the country. The world's most important financial newspapers covered it. And everyone was asking the same question: how was this possible? The most important lesson from this story isn't necessarily about the millions of dollars he accumulated. It's about the way we view wealth. Many people spend their entire lives trying to look rich. They buy things they don't need, with money they don't have, to impress people they barely know. Ronald did exactly the opposite. While the world was paying attention to appearances, he devoted his time to building wealth. In silence, without an audience, without applause, and without hurry. And perhaps that's the hardest part to accept. Because the kind of wealth that truly changes a life rarely looks impressive while it's being built. It grows little by little, almost invisibly. And that's exactly how Ronald Read built his fortune. While nobody noticed, he was turning small decisions repeated over time into something that seemed impossible. And that may be the biggest difference between those who only dream of wealth and those who actually build it. Tell me in the comments, had you ever heard Ronald's story before? And what lesson can you take from it and apply to your life today? Until the next video, and success!